Hello everyone. We have a late video tonight on creating terrain in Unity. This video should go relatively quickly, but it does involve some new tools that we're going to learn and some concepts that I'm going to discuss in more detail in a later video. So what we're going to talk about today is terrain. And when we talk about terrain, terrain is what makes up the landscape of our world. So ideally, we're going to create terrain to fit in front of the camera that makes it look like we have ground and structure and features that make up the land of our game. So in Unity, we have a built-in game object called terrain. And the really nice thing about the terrain game object is that it allows us some settings that make it easier to sculpt and create land without having to actually worry about manipulating planes or spheres or cubes or creating our terrain in a different program. So there are some decent terrain tools used in Unity. So I've created some terrain, and we're going to focus by looking at the terrain settings. So terrain settings, and I got a few notes that I want to bring up. So the little gear symbol right here, this represents our terrain details. And the ones that we care about are width, height, and length right now. So if we were to go into our Y perspective and zoom out, this terrain is gigantic, and we don't want that. So we're going to take our terrain, and we're going to drop down here. We're going to ignore all of these settings. All we care about right now are width, length, and height. And we're going to drop width down to 50, length down to 50, and height down to 60. And that's going to make our terrain a little bit more manageable. You can see it's a lot smaller now. So there are a couple of ways to go at creating terrain. The one way would be to use the terrain sculpting tools that we're going to talk about in a bit to manually raise and lower land. We're not going to worry about that right now. What we're going to do now is use a height map to generate some quick and easy terrain. So a height map, and I'm going to talk about height maps and how we create height maps in a later video, but a height map is a grayscale image that's all shades of black and white and gray, and it outlines or specifies the different heights of the map. So each of these colors or each of these shades is specifying a different height. Now the only tricky thing about height maps, and it's beyond the scope of this video, height maps have to be in what is called a .raw file. So this image that I'm showing you, this is the height map that we're going to be working with, but if we look at the actual project, actually I think it shows us right here, in our assets folder, we don't have this image. This image is a JPEG image. We have something called heightmap.raw, and I've used a program to convert my JPEG image into a raw file. But like I said, in future videos, we'll worry about what that actually is. Okay, so let's apply this height map. If we go into terrain, we have some height map options here. The first one's height map resolution. We're not going to care about most of this stuff. What we're going to do is go down to where it says height map and click import raw. So we're doing this step right now. We're creating a grayscale image that quickly creates terrain features. Must be in the raw format. All right, so we're going to go down here. We're going to import raw, assets, heightmap.raw, and then we get some options. Hopefully the width and height match the width and height of our image. The terrain size match the size that we put over here, so that all looks good. I'm going to click import. And when we import, we can see that we have massive spikes and mountains coming out of our terrain now. Now what this did, if we take a look at our original image, what this did in our image is it took these areas and it assigned white and black extreme heights. So what this means is that the black area that runs through the middle, this is our tallest peak, and then the white areas are our lowest peak. So I'm going to switch to an X so we can see what's happening here. Now you may think to yourself, well, this looks really bad because we've got all this gap and stuff here, but depending on your perspective from above the height map, if we're a character sitting in here, we're never going to see those gaps, right? I could be nestled amongst the mountains here, and here is my starting location, and I can move throughout this world whatever way I see fit. So that's how we use a height map to generate our land. I'm going to go back to the Y view for a moment. Nope, Y view. There we go. I'm going to zoom way out. We can see that that's our land. So that covers how we can do this with a height map. The important thing to understand here, though, is that we don't have to make a height map every time we want to make terrain. So I'm going to zoom in on a feature here. I've gotten myself in orthographic view. There we go. So I'm going to zoom in on like this top feature. Actually, no. Let's go way down. Let's go way down into the belly of the beast here. And let's switch to our X view. Let's go right. Let's say I want to modify this little piece of land right here. In my terrain options, in addition to the gear, I have some other settings. I can use the terrain sculpting tools to raise or lower my terrain. So this little thing right here, this little icon, the arrow, is the raise tool. And notice that it says click to raise, hold shift to lower. What opacity means is it governs how strong of an effect, and I should make a note of this so that I don't forget. So terrain, raise terrain tool. We have different brushes for shape, and then opacity determines how strong the effect is. Excuse me. So moving back in here, now that I have my opacity set to something, we'll set it to 12. Now I can go in here and start to raise up my terrain. And all I'm doing is clicking and dragging here. Raise up this terrain. I can start to sculpt whatever I want, and if I hold shift, start to flatten it out. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Then if we move to our next tool, this is called the Paint Height tool. What this does, the Paint Height tool, is it allows us to put everything to a specific height. If I set this height to 15, let's say, and then I start painting, everything starts getting dropped down by 15 units. Is that there? So everything is moving towards height 15. If I raise it up, height 49, everything starts coming back up. So it's painting everything to a specific height. So we have, excuse me, tickle in my throat. So we have our raise terrain tool, we have our paint height tool that raises or lowers to a specific height. And finally, we're not going to worry about the rest of these tools today, but we also have the Smooth Height tool. And what Smooth Height tool does is it tries to reconcile all of the heights around a particular object. So you can see that it's trying to flatten out and merge everything that's happening here, giving everything here a very smooth look. It's sort of eroding or scraping away any major height differences. And again, we can change how big of an effect that is by changing our brush size and our opacity. So the Smooth Height tool evens out heights. Smooths. Yeah. So these are three great tools we have at our disposal. If we don't like the way that a height map works, we can use these many different tools to be able to change the heights in whatever way we like. So the other thing that we could do, I'm not going to go over it here because you guys should know how to do it from the last video, but you may notice that our terrain looks pretty blank. What you guys are going to be doing in the video is applying texture to, or what you're going to be doing in class is applying a texture to your terrain. We're going to be doing a process very similar to this in class, except you are going to sculpt your terrain, and then you guys are going to go ahead and paint, sorry, not paint, you're going to texture your terrain with a texture that you find on. One thing that I want you guys to try out once you texture online is that we have a painting tool at our disposal. We click this guy right here, paint texture. Once we have a texture on our terrain, instead of just applying all the texture at once, we can paint a texture over a different texture to be able to apply some difference. So what you guys are going to be doing in class, so remember this window here. What you guys are going to be doing in class, after you do all the raising and lowering and sculpting, you're going to add a texture as a base material, which we should know how to do from the other video. And then we're going to add a second texture under our painting, terrain painting. And we're going to paint some different textures on here to give it a more layered and differentiated look. So by the time it's all said and done, we should be able to use Heightmaps. As long as we have our raw file, we should be able to use Heightmaps to create terrain. We can use our raise, lower tools to modify terrain, and then we have our paint tool to paint the terrain. Thanks for watching.